It was a sound that didn't belong in the mountains, low, deliberate, and wrong. Something dragged itself across the earth, leaving gouges deep enough to make your stomach churn. The forest around me seemed to hold its breath, as if even nature knew something unnatural moved beneath the canopy. Hi everyone, you're listening to Thousand Fragments. The moment no one saw, the memory no one kept. I'm bringing it back. Drop a comment below and let me know where you are today. I'm all ears, and let's begin. The year was 2004, and the autumn air carried with it both crispness and an unsettling chill. I'd been working as a park ranger for 6 years, stationed at various posts throughout the western United States. My assignment to the Wind River Range of Wyoming was supposed to be my reward, a promotion of sorts. Most rangers dreaded the isolation of this vast wilderness, but for me, it was exactly what I needed. That year, I was 34, divorced for 2, carrying the weight of a failed marriage like a stone pressed against my chest. The mountains offered silence, not just the absence of noise, but true, profound silence. It was the kind that let you hear your own thoughts, without the constant buzz of civilization drowning them out. Out there among the pines and granite, I could breathe again. We set out before dawn on October 17th, a Tuesday. The assignment was routine. A multi-day patrol through the northwestern quadrant of our territory, checking for illegal hunting, inspecting campsites for damage, and maintaining presence in areas rarely visited by humans. The weather forecast called for clear skies and temperatures in the low 40 seconds, perfect conditions for covering ground. But nothing about what happened next would ever feel perfect or real. My partner was Gordon Hayes, a younger ranger who had transferred from Montana about 14 months earlier. He was eager, competent, though still green when it came to truly remote areas. At first, his intensity exhausted me, but over time, I came to appreciate his thoroughness. In country this remote, one mistake could kill you. A twisted ankle 20 meters from the nearest road might as well have been a death sentence. So, we moved carefully, speaking occasionally about the landscape, the wildlife we spotted, or the condition of the trails. By evening, however, something began to bother Gordon. For the last hour of hiking, he had grown quiet, distant, almost troubled. When I asked him if he was all right, he brushed it off, claiming fatigue, but I could see it in his eyes. "You sure you're all right?" I pressed as we filtered water from a creek. He hesitated, glancing around at the darkening forest. "Do you ever get the feeling you're being watched out here?" I paused, considering the question seriously. Sometimes, yes, it was usually just wildlife. Elk, maybe a mountain lion, keeping its distance. But Gordon shook his head, looking embarrassed. "Probably nothing, just this place feels different than anywhere else I've worked." "Different how?" "Heavier, maybe? Like the air itself has weight?" That night, we ate dinner in near silence. Our freeze-dried meals tasted mechanical, lifeless. Gordon turned in early, citing exhaustion, but I stayed up longer, tending to the fire and listening to the sounds of the night. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called closer. Something small rustled through the underbrush. Normal sounds, comforting sounds. Yet beneath them, barely perceptible, there was something else, a quality to the darkness that felt aware, alive, waiting. The next morning, we broke camp at first light, moving with the efficient silence of experienced outdoorsmen. Gordon seemed more himself, the anxiety of the previous evening apparently forgotten. We ate a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal and bad coffee, packed our gear, and set out northwest, following our planned route deeper into the backcountry. The terrain grew rougher as we climbed, the forest thinning out into scattered corpses of stunted pine and windswept granite outcroppings. By mid-morning, we'd left behind any semblance of maintained trail. This was true wilderness, now the kind of country where you navigate by compass and topographic map, where every ridge looks identical to the last, and where getting turned around could mean wandering for days before finding your way back to civilization. But then we found them. Tracks. Not the crisp, clear prints you'd expect from deer or elk, but strange, long, deep gouges in the earth, as if something heavy had been dragged through the clearing. They were fresh, too fresh. Whatever had made them had passed through recently, possibly within the last few hours. Could be a bear, I said aloud, though even as I spoke the words, I knew they didn't fit. Bears leave distinct paw prints even when dragging a kill. These marks were too uniform, too deliberate, maybe dragging a carcass, I suggested. But Gordon didn't sound convinced. Every instinct I'd developed over 6 years in the wilderness screamed at me to turn back, to reverse course, to get out of this area and report what we'd found. But pride and curiosity are powerful motivators, and I'd spent too long in these mountains to be spooked by some unusual tracks. Let's follow them a bit, I said casually. See where they lead. And so, we followed. The drag marks led us into darker woods, where the trees grew closer together, their branches interlocking overhead to create a canopy that blocked out much of the morning sun. The temperature dropped noticeably, and our breath began to mist in the cold air. The tracks led us deeper into this shadowed woodland, winding between massive pine trunks and fallen logs. Several times, we lost the trail entirely, only to pick it up again a few yards away. Whoever or whatever had made these marks was moving with purpose, heading in a generally northwest direction, deeper into the most remote section of the range. After about 40 minutes, we entered a small valley I didn't recognize from any of my maps. It was a natural depression in the landscape, enclosed on 3 sides by steep granite walls, and accessible only through the narrow gap we'd just passed through. The valley floor was maybe an acre in size, covered in sparse grass and scattered boulders. And it was here that the tracks ended, not gradually, not fading out as they might, if whatever made them had simply changed direction. No. They stopped mid-stride, as if whatever created them had simply vanished into thin air. Gordon and I stood at the end of the trail, staring at the point where the marks terminated, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. Then, Gordon froze, his face drained of color. I turned to look at him, following his gaze. At first, I didn't see it. The shadows were deep in that corner of the valley, and my eyes struggled to adjust after the relative brightness of the open space. But then I saw movement, slow, deliberate movement, and a shape began to emerge from the darkness beneath the granite wall. It wasn't human, not anymore. The figure that stumbled into the weak sunlight was barely recognizable as such. Hunched over, moving with a lurching gait that suggested severe injury or illness, its frame seemed impossibly thin. The clothes it wore were torn and filthy, hanging in tatters. But it was the smell that hit me first. Even from 50 yards away, I could smell death and decay. The sickly, sweet stench of rotting flesh filled the air. "Hello," I called out instinctively, my hand moving to the radio on my belt. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The figure stopped. For a long moment, it remained perfectly still. Then slowly, it turned its head toward us. What I saw in that moment will haunt me forever. Its features were human eyes, nose, mouth, but their proportions and positions were subtly off, as if someone had tried to recreate a human face from memory and gotten the details wrong. The eyes were too far apart, the mouth too wide. And when it opened to breathe, I saw too many teeth, all of them broken and blackened. "We need to leave," Gordon whispered beside me, "right now." The thing took a step toward us, then another. Its movements were wrong too. Joints bending at angles that shouldn't have been possible. Weight shifting in ways that defied biomechanics. It was moving faster now, not running, but somehow covering ground more quickly than its awkward gait should have allowed. I didn't argue with Gordon. We turned and ran. The narrow gap we'd entered through seemed impossibly far away. My pack bounced heavily on my back, throwing off my balance, and I nearly went down twice on the uneven ground. Behind us, I could hear the thing following not footsteps exactly, but a dragging, scraping sound, like something being pulled across stone. We burst through the gap and back into the forest, branches whipping at our faces as we crashed through the undergrowth. I'd lost all sense of direction. All that mattered was putting distance between us and whatever that thing was. Eventually, Gordon grabbed my arm, forcing me to stop. We stood doubled over, gasping for breath, listening. The forest was silent, not the natural silence of a calm day, but the absolute absence of sound that meant something was wrong. No birds, no insects, no wind rustling the branches. Just our labored breathing and the hammering of my heart. Did we lose it? Gordon panted. I shook my head, unsure. I pulled out my compass with trembling hands, but the needle spun uselessly, unable to find north. The compass is broken, I said, hearing the panic rising in my voice. Gordon checked his GPS unit, but the screen showed only an error message. No satellite connection, no position data. Both of us tried our radios, but we got nothing except static. We were lost in the wilderness, our equipment failing, with something hunting us through the trees. And as the afternoon sun began its descent toward evening, I realized with growing horror that we had perhaps 3 hours of daylight left. 3 hours to find shelter, to make sense of what was happening, to survive whatever darkness would bring. Desperation drove us upward, climbing higher into the rugged terrain. As we ascended, I became aware of a new problem: we were being followed. Not closely. Whatever was tracking us kept its distance, staying just out of sight. Every few minutes, I'd hear a sound that didn't belong. A branch breaking where no wind blew. A scatter of pebbles displaced by something moving through the rocks above us. Or that same dragging, scraping sound we'd heard in the valley. Gordon heard it too. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his head swiveled constantly, trying to pinpoint the source of the sounds. Once he started to speak, but I held up a hand for silence. In country like this, sounds carried for miles, and I didn't want to give away our position any more than necessary. We reached a ridgeline just as the sun touched the western peaks. From our vantage point, I could see for miles rolling mountains covered in dense forest, broken by occasional alpine meadows and bare granite slopes, but nothing looked familiar. Landmarks I should have recognized were either hidden by the terrain or simply not there. It was as if we'd somehow wandered into a completely different range, though I knew that was impossible. There, Gordon said, pointing to a cluster of large boulders about 100 yards north along the ridge. We could make camp there, defensible position. He was right. The boulders formed a natural shelter with several narrow gaps between them that would allow us to see anyone or anything approaching. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than trying to set up camp in the open. We made our way to the rocks and quickly prepared for the night. Neither of us bothered with tents. We needed to stay alert, ready to move quickly if necessary. Instead, we cleared a small space among the boulders, laid out our sleeping bags, and built a fire ring with stones. The fire was a risk, visible for miles. But the alternative, spending the night in complete darkness, unable to see what might be approaching, was worse. As darkness fell, we rationed out some food and water, though neither of us had much appetite. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving us shaky and exhausted. My arm throbbed where I'd scraped it during our flight through the forest. Nothing serious, but the raw skin stung in the cold air. What do you think that was? Gordon asked quietly, staring into the flames. Back in the valley. I wanted to give him a rational answer, something about a confused hiker or someone suffering from hypothermia and exposure, but I couldn't lie to him. I don't know, I admitted, but whatever it wasn't natural, and I think it's still out there. As if in response to my words, we heard it, that dragging, scraping sound, coming from somewhere below our position. It was moving slowly, methodically, working its way up the slope toward our camp. The sound would continue for several seconds, then stop, then start again, closer each time. Gordon grabbed his pack and pulled out a flare gun, standard safety equipment for backcountry rangers. Should I fire a signal? He asked. A flare might bring help if there were other rangers or hikers in the area, but it would also pinpoint our exact location to whatever was hunting us. Given how remote we were, the chances of anyone seeing the flare and reaching us before morning were slim. Save it, I said. If things get desperate, we'll use it. The scraping sound grew closer. I could see Gordon's hand shaking as he clutched the flare gun. My own fingers found the canister of bear spray on my belt, another standard piece of equipment that suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. The sound stopped about 50 yards below our position. For several minutes, there was only silence. Then I heard something new. Breathing. Deep, labored breathing, like someone who'd been running for miles. It came from multiple directions now, as if several people were surrounding our camp, hidden in the darkness beyond our fire's light. Show yourselves, I shouted, trying to inject authority into my voice despite my terror. This is federal land. You're trespassing. Identify yourselves. The breathing stopped. The figures froze in place, and for a heartbeat, everything was perfectly still. Then they began to move again, but differently now. Instead of circling, they were closing in, tightening the ring around our camp with slow, deliberate steps. Gordon raised the flare gun, his hand surprisingly steady now. On 3, he said quietly, "We run north toward that gap in the rocks. Don't stop for anything." I nodded, getting my feet under me, ready to move. Gordon counted down. 3, 2, 1. He fired the flare straight up. The brilliant red light arced into the sky, illuminating the entire ridgeline in a hellish crimson glow. And in that moment of clarity, I saw them clearly for the first time. There were 6 of them, not 3 or 4. They'd formed a complete circle around our camp. And they were close, much closer than I'd realized. But it was their faces that made my breath catch in my throat. Each one was subtly different, but they all shared that same wrongness, that same violation of human proportions. And they were all staring directly at us, with eyes that reflected the flare's light, like animals caught in headlights. We ran. The gap Gordon had spotted was maybe 20 yards away, but it felt like miles. Behind us, I heard sounds not quite screams, not quite growls, but something in between. Footsteps crashed through the underbrush, closer now. The things abandoned their slow approach for an all-out pursuit. I reached the gap first, barely squeezing through the narrow opening between 2 massive boulders. Gordon was right behind me, and then we were through, stumbling down the far side of the ridge, sliding more than running on loose screen. The flare was still burning in the sky above us, casting our shadows long and distorted across the slope. We crashed through the forest in blind panic, branches tearing at our clothes and faces. I lost my pack somewhere in the darkness, heard it rip free from my shoulders, but didn't stop to retrieve it. All that mattered was escape, distance, survival. The sounds of pursuit faded, but I didn't trust the silence. We kept running until exhaustion forced us to stop, collapsing against a fallen log, deep in a dense thicket of pine. My lungs felt like they were on fire. My legs trembled uncontrollably, and I could taste blood in my mouth from the exertion. The flare had burned out. We sat in complete darkness, listening to our own ragged breathing and the night sounds of the forest slowly returning. An owl called in the distance. Small things rustled in the underbrush. Normal sounds, safe sounds. But I knew we weren't safe. Whatever those things were, they were still out there. And we'd just lost all our supplies, our shelter, everything except what we carried on our belts and in our pockets. "We need to keep moving," I whispered after several minutes. "Get as far away from here as possible before sunrise." "Which direction?" Gordon asked, his voice hollow with exhaustion and fear. Without our compass or GPS, without any familiar landmarks, we were navigating blind. All I knew was that we needed to get lower to find water to make our way back toward anything resembling civilization. "Downhill," I said finally. "Water flows downhill. If we can find a stream, we can follow it to a river. And rivers eventually lead to people. It was a plan of sorts. We hauled ourselves to our feet and began walking, moving slowly and carefully through the darkness, testing each step before committing our weight. It was agonizingly slow going, but the alternative, breaking an ankle or walking off a cliff in the darkness, was worse. Dawn found us miles from our abandoned camp, descending into a narrow ravine with steep walls on either side. We had no idea where we were, how far we'd traveled, or which direction we were heading. But we were alive, and for the moment, that was enough. The sun rose into a grey sky, heavy with the promise of snow. By the thin morning light, I could see Gordon clearly for the first time since we'd fled our camp. He looked terrible, face scratched and bleeding from branches, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion, skin pale except for the bruises already forming where he'd fallen during our flight. I probably looked no better. We stopped beside a small creek that trickled down the ravine. Both of us drank deeply despite knowing we should filter the water first. Giardia and parasites seemed like trivial concerns compared to what we'd experienced in the night. The cold water helped clear my head, and I tried to take stock of our situation. We'd lost almost everything. My pack, with all our food, camping equipment, first aid supplies, and emergency gear, was gone. Gordon still had his, but it had been damaged in the flight, one of the straps torn free, the frame bent, several items lost through tears in the fabric. Between us, we had 2 water bottles, the flare gun with 1 remaining flare, my bear spray, Gordon's knife, and the clothes on our backs. No GPS, no working compass, no radio. We needed to find a way out of this ravine, get to higher ground, and see if we could spot any landmarks. The climb was grueling. Higher we went, fighting against gravity, using our hands as much as our feet. The terrain refused to cooperate, twisting paths into dead ends, forcing detours through thick stands of pine. And all the while, we were being followed not closely, but patiently, deliberately. I heard at first a branch snapping where no wind blew. Then another sound, quieter, more subtle, like someone dragging their foot across gravel. Gordon heard it too, his shoulders tensed, his head swiveling constantly, trying to pinpoint the source of the sounds. Around noon, we decided to rest briefly, hoping to regain some strength before continuing. But even sitting still, we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest seemed alive with anticipation, every shadow holding potential danger. When we resumed our climb, we noticed something strange. Trees marked with symbols carved into their bark patterns that looked ancient, alien, wrong. They weren't random scratches, they were deliberate, precise. Someone or something had been here before us, marking territory. Finally, after hours of relentless struggle, we emerged onto a sloping meadow. To our relief, there, maybe 2 miles away across the valley, was a column of smoke rising into the grey sky. New energy flooded through us. Driven by hope, we set off across the meadow at the fastest pace we could manage. The meadow gave way to forest again, and we plunged into the trees, following a game trail that seemed to lead in the right direction. But as we got closer, unease crept back in. The smoke wasn't moving like wood smoke should. It rose straight up in a perfect column, unwavering despite the morning breeze, and there was no smell. No familiar scent of burning pine or oak, nothing at all. We emerged from the trees into a clearing, and there before us was the source of the smoke, a small cabin, old and weathered, with smoke rising from its chimney. But the cabin itself was wrong. The windows were dark, no light showing from within. The door hung partially open, creaking slightly as it swung in the breeze, and the ground around the cabin was disturbed, marked with those same drag marks we'd seen the day before. "We should keep going," Gordon said quietly. "This doesn't feel right." He was correct, but desperation clouded my judgment. We needed supplies, shelter, some way to contact the outside world. And maybe, I told myself, whoever lived here needed help. Maybe they were victims of the same things that had hunted us. Approaching cautiously, I reached the door and pushed it open wider, revealing the dark interior. I could see a table, a few chairs, a cold fireplace, but the chimney was smoking. That made no sense. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The cabin was a single room, maybe 15 feet on a side. It had clearly been abandoned for years. The furniture was rotting, the floor covered in leaves and debris that had blown in through gaps in the walls. But on the table, looking completely out of place, was a park ranger's radio, my radio, the one that had been in my lost pack. My blood went cold as I stared at it. This was impossible. We'd traveled for hours, covered miles of difficult terrain. There was no way my pack could be here. While I stood frozen, Gordon discovered something carved into the wall beside the door. Still fresh and oozing sap was a message. Stay. We ran again, but this time it felt different. The forest seemed to shift and change around us. Trails appeared and disappeared. The terrain refused to make sense. We climbed ridges only to find ourselves at the bottom of valleys. Streams flowed uphill. Time lost all meaning in that headlong flight through the trees. By midday, the snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier. Big wet flakes clung to everything, obscuring our vision. The temperature dropped rapidly, and I realized with growing dread that we were in serious danger of hypothermia. Exhaustion weighed heavily on both of us. Tell me about Montana, I said, trying to keep Gordon talking to keep him conscious. Why did you transfer out here? He was quiet for a long moment, and I thought he might have fallen asleep. But then he spoke, his voice distant. There was an incident. A hiker died on my watch. I should have found them sooner. Should have organized the search better. The investigation cleared me, but I couldn't stay. Everywhere I looked, I saw their family asking me why I didn't save them. Thought coming here would help, he continued. Thought the isolation would be healing. But there's something wrong with this place, Roger. Something that's been wrong for a long time. The snow continued to fall, and the afternoon faded toward evening. We took turns trying to stay awake, though I'm not sure either of us succeeded. The cold seeped into our bones, and consciousness became a slippery thing, hard to hold on to. At some point, I'm not sure when, I heard Gordon cry out. I jerked awake to find him struggling to his feet, pointing into the snow-filled darkness beyond our shelter. They're here, he said. They found us. Shapes moved through the falling snow now, dozens of them, maybe more emerging from the storm. Their movements were mechanical yet organic simultaneously. And there, in the center of the group, stood something taller than the rest. Something that might have been their leader or controller, or simply another victim of whatever madness afflicted this place. Gordon pulled out the flare gun, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. Last one, he said. Make it count. He fired the flare into the sky, and for a brief moment, the entire scene was illuminated in brilliant red light. The creatures froze, and I could see them clearly. Dozens of them ringing our position, close enough now that I could make out individual details. The faces all different but all wrong, the movements jerky and puppet-like. And then, miraculously, I heard a sound that didn't belong, the distant whoop, whoop, whoop of helicopter rotors. The creatures heard it too. They stopped advancing, their heads tilting in unison toward the sky. The helicopter sound grew louder, and suddenly a spotlight swept across the slope, bright enough to turn night into day. The creatures, if that's what they were, scattered, moving with sudden speed back into the trees, leaving Gordon and me alone beneath the overhang. The helicopter hovered overhead, the downdraft from its rotors creating a whiteout of swirling snow. I could see the Park Service insignia on its side. Could hear someone shouting through a loudspeaker, but I couldn't make out the words over the rotor noise. A basket descended from the helicopter, and hands, normal human hands, reached out to pull us to safety. The next hours were a blur. The flight to the hospital in Jackson. Doctors examining us, treating us for hypothermia and exposure. Questions from Park Service investigators, local police, people whose faces I don't remember, and whose names I never learned. They told us we'd been missing for 3 days, not one. That we'd been found 23 miles from where we'd started our patrol, in an area that wasn't even part of our assigned territory. That our equipment had been scattered across miles of wilderness, found in places we couldn't possibly have reached given the timeline and our physical condition. They told us it was a bear attack, that we'd been pursued by a rogue grizzly, that our equipment failures were due to the extreme cold affecting our electronics, that what we'd seen were other hikers suffering from their own cases of hypothermia and exposure, their appearances distorted by our compromised mental state. The official report was filed, signed, and buried. Gordon took a medical discharge and moved back to Montana. I transferred to a different station somewhere with more people, fewer trees, less silence. We don't talk anymore. We tried once to discuss what really happened out there, but the words wouldn't come. How do you articulate something that defies articulation? How do you explain what you saw when you're not sure yourself? What was real and what was the product of fear and exhaustion? 20 years have passed. I'm 54 now, working a desk job safe in the confines of civilization. But I still dream about the Wind River Range. I still hear that dragging, scraping sound in quiet moments. And sometimes in crowds, I'll see a face that's just slightly wrong, proportions just slightly off, and I'll remember. I tell myself it was just exposure, just hypothermia-induced hallucinations. I tell myself that the human mind is fragile, that extreme stress can make us see things that aren't there. I tell myself that whatever happened in those mountains has a rational explanation. If only I could find it. But deep down, in a place I try not to examine too closely, I know the truth. There are places in this world where the normal rules don't apply, where things exist that shouldn't exist, where the boundaries between possible and impossible blur and fade. The Wind River Range is one of those places. And God help anyone who wanders too deep into its shadows, because once the wilderness decides to keep you, all the rational explanations in the world won't bring you back. And that was another story lost in time. But stay with me, because there's still more waiting in the shadows.